Welcome to Be Customer Led, where we'll explore how leading experts in customer and employee experience are navigating organizations through their own journey to be customer led, and the actions and behaviors employees and businesses exhibit to get there. And now your host, Marbu Brown.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Be Customer Led, where we talk to renowned industry leaders about the proven strategies that companies use to raise the bar on customer and employee experience at their companies or the companies that they work with as clients, for example. And today, we have another great guest for you. It's Matt Marcotte. He's the founder of the M2 Collaborative, which is a leadership coaching and brand strategy consultancy. Now, Matt has spent more than 3 decades in the C-suite, building, scaling, reinventing, and leading some of the most valuable brands in the world, including Apple, Gap, Tory Burch, Bergdorf Goodman, and Salesforce. Currently, Matt teaches an MBA course on consumer and brand relationships at Boston College, his alma mater, and is a Columbia University trained coach. Welcome to the program, Matt.
Thanks, Marbu. So nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
Hey, I'm glad you could join us, and I'm looking forward to a really insightful discussion today. But before we launch into that, on Be Customer Led, we always like to give our audience an opportunity to get to know our guests on a deeper level, a little bit more of the backstory behind our guest's career, besides just the headlines in their bio. So would you please tell us a little bit about your career journey and some of the key moments that have shaped your approach to brand strategy today?
Sure. Thank you. Well, you talked a little bit about it in the intro. So I spent 34 years mostly in the consumer facing retail world. And then for the last 3.5 years, before I started my own practice, I was in the tech world at Salesforce. And so for me, I've been lucky enough because I've been with probably some of the most recognized and successful brands in the world at their time, and was able to see firsthand the power of expressing brands fully, thoroughly across the globe. And so the way that I've actually always, I guess, thought about myself is this idea of being a consumer anthropologist. And what I mean by that is I'm fascinated by why people behave the way they do and how that has translated into my work around brand strategy. Is how do brands create authentic relationships with the customers that see themselves in that brand and build a kind of mutually beneficial, profitable, and hopefully scalable and sustainable loyal brand following. And that work, what I found in the time that the 34 years that I was doing this, that customer really starts with the internal customer, or the employee. And if you don't actually invest in them, then they will not halo the brand and the brand DNA out to the external customer. And so that work, that experience, all of those kind of years of living in that world has really shaped how I think about where you start and where you invest your time and your effort, and is obviously the subject of the book that I wrote.
Thanks for sharing that, Matt. Now, there are a couple of major themes that you emphasize in your consultancy and in your book. One of them is, for example, people, not products, are brand's secret sauce. Another one is belief fuels commitment, and commitment beats compliance every time, right? So tell us a little bit more about these themes, how you started, keen to emphasizing those ones. And I have a few comments about that because I also wrote a book, and this is so aligned with the I talk about.
Oh, good. I'd like to actually hear that. So here's an interesting way, I think, of kind of framing what I mean when I talk about this idea of people, not products, are brand secret sauce. If you actually, depending how you count, there are probably between 500,000 to 1 million consumer brands in the world. And if you think about just the sheer number of products that you have access to and can potentially be commoditized with lookalikes, products on their own just don't win. And so in the world where access has become even easier, right? The barriers to entry are so low for a lot of brands, meaning product wise, especially direct to consumer, the experience that you deliver, the culture that you create, the relationships that you forge are the way that you stand out, are the way that you actually build profitability through scalable loyalty, right? And so for me, not only do I see it in that lens, but as I said at the beginning, having worked in an intersection of consumer brands where, human capital was always the biggest part of the biggest lever I had to pull, you realize that it's people working with people that creates stickiness. So if you realize that humans were wired to connect and we're tribal by nature, so it's really important when we talk about building brands and building authentic relationships and being customer centric, you have to figure out how to create that connection between humans. And so for me, the way you do that, obviously, is that you actually unleash your people, your greatest asset, to do that.
Well, what I'm going to say is one of the things that I talk about, from time to time is, look, brands go out there, they spend big money on commercials to influence people in 30 seconds, right?
Mm.
Hey, but when you walk into a Costco, you don't spend 30 seconds in a Costco, right? So that interaction between you and the people in
Yeah.
Costco have the ability to influence customers far more than, a 30-second ad, right? And so I always come back to this notion that for the folks working in there, they are the commercial,
Yes.
right? You can pick so many other different scenarios, and I think that lines up right with the point that you're making.
Yeah. It's interesting. I think you'll find this resonates because of what you just said and what you wrote in your book. When I was young as a district manager at Gap, I created this very simple formula, let's just say, to try and explain where we should be spending our efforts. So, every day, especially when you're in retail, and I think every business, you get a dashboard, right? Results. And I
Mhm.
would see people so focused on the result, which is important. But to me, the result is what's already happened. It's done.
That's right.
By the time you see it on the flash, that result exists. You're not negotiating with that result any longer. So where we as leaders have to spend our time is to figure out how to influence the inputs to that output. So if results are an output, what are the inputs? So the first input is experience. And to your point, it's going into that Costco, it's the product selection, it's the visual merchandising, it's the customer experience, it's the atmosphere, the way the store is laid, all the things that actually go into how you feel about the brand and how you choose or not choose to participate is the experience. And what drives that experience is people, right?
That's
People in
right.
corporate offices figuring out what to buy, people in the front lines, the people that you actually interact with. And so it was people plus stores or plus experience equals results. So if you want to drive results, you have to focus on the experience. And if you want to improve the experience, you have to focus on the people. So results always ended up being about people.
When you talk about people, one of the things you talk about is this whole notion of the difference between a culture of compliance and a
Mm.
culture of commitment in an organization, right? What's the clearest way to tell the difference between whether you have a
Yeah.
culture of compliance and a culture of commitment? And how can leaders move people from one of those to the other?
Yeah. So I like to say that compliance requires supervision, whereas commitment requires partnership. And
Hmm.
so if you're in an organization that is run by checklists and by directives that come from on high down, where it's do as I say, execute, execute, execute on these, check the box, check the box, pretty much you're in a culture of compliance. Because the idea is that we do what we're supposed to do. It's the what I have to do. In cultures of commitment, when I talk about this idea requires partnership, it's because the people that are with your organization, your teams, your peers, whatever it might be, they have voice, they have agency, they have skin in the game.
Hmm.
And so people in that case don't say, what do I need to do, which is compliance. They look at what more can I do? Because they're
Hmm.
connected to the mission, they're connected to the purpose, they're connected to the brand. They understand their part in it, and they have a sense of ownership and responsibility for furthering that brand. So let me give you a perfect example. So last year, my father and I were going to go to dinner at this restaurant, very hard restaurant to get into, but he wanted to go. And so I got reservations for 5:30 because, he's 90 years old. And so turns out he couldn't go. But I had two friends who really wanted to go to this restaurant who hadn't been able to get in. So I called the restaurant, got someone on the phone who was the maitre d' or the manager or whomever. And I said to him, we had a reservation at 5:30 for two. My father can't go. Is it possible to make the reservation for three? And he very quickly said to me, no. So fast. And so I thought, okay, before I just hang up, let me ask one more time. I said, well, can I just ask a question? Is there any other time of the night that you would be able to fit three? He's like, sure, 8:30. So two things. One, he was very compliant in answering the question that had been given to him. Can I fit three at 5:30? No. But based on how fast he answered my second question, it was obvious to me he knew there was an opening at 8:30. And so if he had been a committed employee, committed to wanting me to eat at the restaurant, committing to wanting to make sure the restaurant got the revenue instead of losing two people's revenue, committed to the fact that he really wanted me to experience this incredible kind of, culinary adventure, he would have said, in my mind, I can't fit you in at 5:30, but if you're open to 8:30, I can do three people then. That experience would have changed everything for me. And it was just a great example of the difference between a compliance organization and a committed organization.
You remind me of something. I had the privilege of working at Amazon, and there's an example that somebody, one of the Amazon leadership principles is ownership.
Mm,
And somebody gave the example of going to an apartment where they saw a Christmas tree nailed to the floor. Okay. And they said, you know what, an owner would never do that. So there's a big difference between when employees are bought in and they embrace this idea of ownership
yes.
versus just being a worker, if you
Yes.
if you will. And that's just like the kind of thing that you're describing there. And I even just think about the whole set of Amazon leadership principles, and I haven't been in Amazon for quite a number of years now, but I still know the leadership principles, at least the ones that were leadership principles when I was there. And the reason why is because we lived those leadership principles like every single day,
Yeah.
all day long, right? You didn't have to memorize them because you lived them. I love that example that you gave, talking about the culture of commitment versus culture. You know what, Matt? Let's just take a second because we haven't actually said anything about your book. So why don't you give us the name of
Oh,
the book and stuff, and let's do that, and then we'll continue.
so I think the best way to describe the book, it's called Built on Belief, Why Cultures of Commitment Are the Competitive Advantage. And
Hmm.
essentially, it's just an extension of what we've started talking about, which is, to me, over 34 years of running and building and scaling some of the most important, some of the most recognizable brands in the world, what's been very clear to me is that belief is what drives success. And the real challenge is, how do you turn belief into a culture of commitment? And a culture of commitment is one where like we just talked about, people live the brand. They understand at a cellular level the purpose, the mission. They are
And
engaged,
they're bought
and,
in.
and they're bought in because they have agency and they're part of the process. They're not talked to. And you talked to this word ownership, super important. And so the idea of the book is to, I start out with a very specific question, which is, when is the last time you asked your brand what it believes in? And I think when you're a startup, it's very clear. It's the reason you exist. It's the reason you form. It's the reason you are created, because you see an opportunity, right? A hole in the market, a opportunity to differentiate. Everyone's super clear. No one's working for salary. They're all there because they're all part of the mission. As companies get bigger, they start to fade away from that unless they are constantly revisiting their DNA. And so the book is a call to recenter yourself on your belief.
Mm-hmm.
And the second part of that belief is, as I said at the beginning, the most important asset you have, the most important ambassador to success from a brand is your internal customer, your employee. And yet most brands leapfrog over their internal customer to focus on the external customer. And they don't realize, oddly enough, that if we talk once again, that A plus B equals C, brand plus employee equals customer experience and success. So the idea of the book is to really help people understand that, but then also give frameworks and ways to think about how you build that culture of commitment.
Yeah, and while we're on this topic, I'll just say my own book is called Blueprint for Customer Obsession, and one of the themes that we get at is this whole notion that you can't be customer obsessed if you're not employee obsessed.
Yes.
Right? That most important asset that you talk about is just absolutely critical. But hey, in your work with global brands, you have an example where belief and commitment instead of compliance really unlocked extraordinary results?
Yes. I mean, there are so many. I've been lucky enough to be part of or help shepherd a lot of these organizations. I'll give you an example from my time at Apple. And so what was interesting about Apple is I joined when the iPod was introduced for the PC customer, which means their business just went crazy. Like it just exploded.
Mm-hmm.
And what that meant for the company was it was the beginning of many things. So we saw the iPod, the iPhone, the iPad. So all these huge product releases. We were opening about 50 stores a year. We went from in my organization, because I oversaw the North America, went from 10,000 employees to 25,000 employees in about 3 years. And so you are bringing in huge amounts of new people, new ideas, new perspectives. And you have to be very clear about A, what you're looking for, and B, the culture that you're creating, because you're really bringing on more people than you have existing already. And so just that alone could change the entire culture and DNA of the organization. Add to that to bring in that many people, there weren't that many Mac experts that even existed that would be the right fit for the company. And so you're looking for things like, instead of technical expertise, we're looking for attitude, wanting to be in service, wanting to share your love for Apple, wanting customers to be as excited about the brand as you were. And then we said we can teach some of the other technical things. And so that's the approach that we actually took. Now, the interesting thing is you've got all those people. We use Net Promoter Score, NPS, which I think a lot of people are familiar with, at least in the retail industry. And what we found after a certain point was that our product knowledge scores were going down because 90% of our customers researched product online before they came into the store. So a lot of them were coming in knowing more than our employees did because our employees were not hired for only technical proficiency, right? And we have new products coming out all the time. What we also realized was that we couldn't traditionally train our employees because if you actually walk into an Apple store, they're so crazy busy. Getting people off the floor wasn't going to work. And quite honestly, classroom training isn't really all that effective to begin with. And so we had to rethink how we thought about training. And instead of just stopping at we don't have time for training, I challenged my team. I said, you're telling me that nobody that works in our stores has any downtime. And so they went and they researched, they came back and they realized we actually have about a half an hour per day. It doesn't all happen at the same time. So what do we do with that? And so because everyone's super committed to the idea of helping our people exceed and succeed, we actually revisited. I don't know if you remember the SRAs. So when I was in school, the SRAs were this self-guided tutorial about reading. You had the green card, the blue card, the purple card. You would read something, take a test, get graded, pass, move on to the next thing. So we used the SRAs as the foundation for how we built this self-directed, team-driven kind of consumable nuggets of training. And we saw within a very short period of time, 6 months actually, our product knowledge scores improved by 0.6, which in the world of NPS is huge.
That's cool.
And it's all because we were committed to the idea that we needed to do this. We didn't let our obstacles get in our way. We got super creative because we had a higher order kind of mission we were solving for. And we engaged people to find the answers, and they were all on board to do it. So, so we had a lot of success with that, which was, I think, a good example of that commitment to excellence.
Very cool. Now, Matt, I got to tell you something. You talked about SRAs just now, and
Like dating myself.
I had an incredible flashback because I didn't even grow up in the United States, but somehow at my school we had the SRA reading program. Okay,
Oh,
so I grew up with this, right? And it's like, you're talking about it, and I'm thinking to myself, there's probably, kids who grew up in the States who didn't have an opportunity to go through SRAs.
yeah.
But I happen to be one of those who grew up in a whole
I
different
love
country,
that.
and I did,
You know
right?
exactly what I'm
West
talking about.
Africa, yeah, in West Africa, no less. So cool. Well, look, many leaders start with strategy and logic, right? And that's kind of like the head part of things to rally the organization around a vision. But why do you believe that starting with the heart creates stronger belief and action? And what does starting with the heart actually look like?
Yeah, thank you. So it's interesting. I always, there's this quote that Simon Sinek used in his TED Talk that I think is a really good kickoff to this conversation. And the quote is this: Martin Luther King Jr. didn't say, I have a plan. He said, I have a dream.
There you go.
And so if you think about, I have a plan as a head version of a conversation, I have a dream as a heart version. And if you actually look at neuroscience, humans are wired to feel first, think second, act third. So
Mhm.
for me, I've led large teams my whole life. You've got to get people to be interested, to be curious, to have some sort of emotional connection or kind of interest in, like, wow, okay, I don't know exactly what you're going to tell me, but you've piqued my curiosity. And if you actually take these words, heart, head, hand, which is the framework that I use, and you Google it, here's an interesting little statistic. It'll spit back most of the results with head, heart, hands. It'll reverse the two words. And the reason it does that, I believe, is because head, heart, hands is a more accepted framework. Because if you think about going into boardrooms, everyone leads with a deck. Everyone leads with a strategy deck, with data, and that's lovely. But what that assumes is that people will act because the logic is sound, but without emotional engagement, they either resist or they check out. And so if you think about how humans, like I said, process, they feel their way into things first, right? They look for meaning, for purpose, and then they use their brain to analyze that idea or that feeling, to decide whether it's worth thinking about it, to learn more about it. And then they actually move into the tactile application, which is, how do you execute on this? And
Mhm.
so I have found that in moving large groups of people across the world, you have to get them bought into an idea before they'll listen to what you have to say.
Absolutely. Now, give me an example of doing the heart thing first as opposed to doing the head thing first,
Yeah.
right? Let me tell you what comes to mind
Yeah.
immediately for me. I think of a scenario where, well, actually, there's a few different examples, and there's this one with Chewy, right? The
You know
company
exactly
that
where you're going with this.
sells
Yeah.
pet food and pet supplies and everything like that. And there's this customer who had gotten prescription food for his dog, and then the dog passed away, and
Hmm.
and he had this whole thing of prescription food that had never been used. He contacted Chewy to see if he could return it and get a refund, and they basically said, look, you don't have to return that thing. You just donate it wherever, and we'll give you a refund, right? And so they did, and he thought that was the end of it. Then he got a card with expressing condolences, and then subsequent to that, they sent him an oil painting of his dog.
Yeah.
I mean, like, he was totally blown away. It's like he didn't think anybody would care that much,
Yes.
right? But that's a hard thing, and clearly the people who are on the other end, they're bought in, right? They heard that and they did something, and you pick another company like Zappos, where one of the customer service associates was on the phone talking to a lady whose feet hurt, and she mentioned that she was expecting a baby, and then you know um, a few weeks later, she gets this thing in the mail with all of these baby things, in the mail, right? Well, and she just said this in passing, right? And but these folks, they've gotten employees in the fold who believe in the mission, and so that's what they're doing. They believe in the mission and they're following through on it. It's making a difference for those customers.
Yes. First of all, there's so many things to actually unpack based on what you just shared. So I believe that the majority of people, whether they have a pet or not, have heard a version of that Chewy story. So there's two things. One is the power of emotional resonance. What you're sharing is an emotional story. It's the why, it's the soul, it's the culture, it's the who we are. That's what people think about when they hear that story. Like, wow, what an amazing organization Chewy is. They really care, right? And those are the things that people remember. The second piece is you are now illustrating, I think, a very underutilized and powerful strategic tool for brands, which is storytelling. Because stories embody ideas. They embody belief. They embody direction. They help people understand what they should do or what they shouldn't do in ways that are actually cellular and understandable and have meaning. And so, this whole idea of like, people don't care what you do until they care why you do it. And so this idea of the heart is about the why, right? The culture, the soul, the kind of the reason you exist. And then what you do, your strategy should be an expression of your beliefs, right? And so your third point that you brought up around, they have these people who really believe it. You asked me earlier what leaders should do to go from compliance to commitment. You've got to make sure that everyone that is part of your team believes what you believe. And I had this boss years ago who said, you don't got to work here, you get to work here. And the whole point of that is every brand is not for every person, both employee and customer. And that's great because you want to align your beliefs with the beliefs of the brand, because then you can operate as one. And so to me, imagine someone at Chewy who is in charge, like someone at the customer service desk, let's just say, or department, that gets an email like that and they're compliant and they're like, oh, I'm sorry, don't worry about returning it. That's where it stops. Versus the people who are committed are like, what more can I do? What more can I do? And oh, by the way, a very important part of this story is there are vehicles, there are frameworks, there are processes, there's authority for employees to make those decisions. So aligning expectation with resources is so important in helping people to be committed, right? You don't stifle the commitment. You're actually enabling them to do what they want to do, which is so critically important.
Absolutely. So, companies or leaders that, have started with the heart, and we've talked about a couple of them, but any more you want to share on that in terms of, folks who have really focused on starting with the heart versus the head?
Yep.
And, what kind of results have they achieved by doing that?
Yeah, there's two that I could share with you. One I won't go too deep into, and one I'll go a little deeper. But part of my MBA class, we always talk about brands and for different reasons. And one of the ones we were talking about 2 weeks ago was Trader Joe's. And I did a deeper dive on Trader Joe's. And really, he's a perfect example of starting with a heart, head, hands. Because the way he started Trader Joe's specifically was this idea of a deep belief, not a business model. And his belief was there should be something for kind of educated, curious customers, right? Someone who's well-traveled, well-read, wanted to access good food at fair prices. Mm-hmm. And so there's belief system of what Trader Joe's is, and oh, by the way, what it isn't. And that's why you can't go to Trader Joe's and buy every single thing you can get at a grocery store. They have, I think it's on average like 4,000 different CCs, like different items, whereas a
Hmm.
typical grocery store may have 150,000, right? So there's filters they use to what they do, what they carry, why they carry it, how it actually works back to their belief system of what's important, what their customer needs to be getting, what the customer wants. And they've been able to withstand the challenges, I'm sure, and also the pressure to become more of a traditional grocery store, because I'm sure they've had customers say, well, why can't we do this? And why can't we do that? And it's evolved them, but it hasn't necessarily changed their DNA. So to me, Trader Joe's is a great example of for people to go deeper dive on, like the kind of how it started and how so much of what they believed is still alive in the brand that we see today. On a second, more personal level, when I went to Bergdorf Goodman, part of why they hired me was to reinvent the brand along with the new president. 111-year-old, venerable, probably one of the most valuable luxury houses in the world, even though it's technically a department store. But they had a very toxic culture. And the people at the top had really forgotten who they were. And the people that worked in the kind of organization had been there for a while and were very passionate. And passion, when it's not expressed correctly or not supported, turns into frustration. So for
Hmm.
me, even being the chief operating officer, I was like, we have to get everybody on the same page before we can move forward. So I spent 3 months meeting with all 1,200 employees in groups of 10 to understand what they believed, where they saw the brand, what the challenges were, what it should be, what ideas they had. And at the end of every week, I would publish this email called "You Said, We Heard, We Did." And the idea was to be transparent with the entire organization of what I'd learned in my week, how we translated or interpreted what we had learned to make sure that we got it right, and then what we were doing to kind of react to what they were telling us. So I'll give you a really simple example, but it really made a big difference in rebuilding trust, which is a huge part of building this culture of commitment. So one of the things they told us one week was that they had all these lights out on the sales floor. Now you think to yourself, 10 lights, 20 lights, 500 lights. At a luxury department store, 500 lights were out. Okay, that seems simple. 2 weeks, every single light we had replaced. And just that very operational, tactical follow through helped to rebuild a certain amount of trust, because heard them, took it seriously, did something about it. And so those ways of actually allowing the culture to shift from a compliance culture where people are truly disengaged and frustrated into a culture of commitment and recommitment where people are like, thank God we now are back to where this brand should be, fuels a different level of passion for driving the business forward. You now feel supported. You now feel you're part of something. You now feel pride again. And then you're willing to express that to the external customer.
I'm going to use a sports example. I don't know
Great.
if you're into football at all or anything like that, but I think it was Randy Moss was at the Raiders for a while. He wasn't doing much of anything on the Raiders. And I used to watch him, and I used to say to myself, Randy Moss has figured out these guys aren't serious about winning, and I just don't really care. And then he wound up going to the Patriots, and the next thing he had a record year. It wasn't like Randy Moss stopped. He forgot how to play or he lost his
Yep.
ability. It was like, you guys aren't serious, and I'm not putting out the effort. I'm putting as much effort as you're putting in. And then he went somewhere where people had a culture of winning and
Yes.
they wanted to win. And he says, you know what? I'm bringing my very best game to this table.
Yes.
And I think he and Tom Brady both had career years where, they did more touchdowns than anybody had ever done. And I think what you just described is a great example of that whole thing where the folks had to be re-energized in terms of their belief. And it might have been a little thing, but it was a big thing because of
It
the
was
trust it
huge.
inspired. Yeah.
So you asked me at the very beginning, one of the concepts I talked about, which is that people, not products, are the secret sauce. And this is a perfect example of that. He went from a football organization to a football organization. Same sport, same rules, same everything. But the culture in the two different teams was so different, at least for him, that he played differently in both teams, right? Based on your example. That is exactly it. So in a world where people are all doing the same thing, we're all playing in the same sandbox, how you actually show up, the culture, the experience, the way you unleash your talent makes all the difference to success.
Yep, absolutely. So, Matt, unfortunately, we are running out of time. And so let me just go to this question.
Sure.
For a leader who wants to start
Yeah.
shifting from a compliance culture to a commitment culture tomorrow,
Mm-hmm.
what is the very first step they should take with their team?
Yeah. So I would say the very first step is to be kind of clear about why you want a culture of commitment. So defining what that means, right? So what does a culture of commitment look like for you? So the why first, right? It's always the why, how that's going to kind of change your business. Then for me, the what is your North Star? Like, how do you define what great looks like? And this is where I think this third piece, which I think a lot of people fall down on, it's having a very clear and honest conversation with yourself about where you're starting from. So here's where you want to go. Here's where you're starting from. All the stuff in the middle is the work. And then sequencing the work in the crawl, walk, run strategy. But I would say the most important thing is to make sure you bring your employees along with you. Help them to be part of creating the future, create the frameworks and the processes and the direction, and then make sure you surround yourself with people who want to be part of that journey and give them a voice. So a few steps, but the first being like, be super clear about why you want to do it in the first place, what it looks like, and then where you're starting from.
Well, I want to thank you for, all of the material that we've been able to cover today. I think that there will be a lot of nuggets that people can take from our discussion and put to use right away in their own businesses. And that's one of the things we always like to do is to give people some of those nuggets that they can take and put to use right away. Now, if people want to continue this discussion with you, what's the best way for them to get a hold of you?
Yes. So you can find me on LinkedIn, Matt Marcotte, or you can send me an email at matt@m2collaborative.com. Will be the two ways for us to stay in touch.
All right. And again, give us the name of your book and where people can find that.
So it's called Built on Belief, Why Cultures of Commitment Are the Competitive Advantage. And it's available on Amazon and Goodreads. So Amazon's probably the easiest place to get it.
Cool. Well, I thank you again, Matt, for spending this time with me. And to those of you who are listening, I thank you for spending this time with us. I'm sure, like I said, that you've got some things that you can use, you can put to use right away. And if you have more questions, feel free to get a hold of Matt. Feel free to get a hold of me. And, we'll make sure that we get you to continue this conversation. But that's it from us today. Now, I'm hoping that you're going to join me again next time because we're going to have another great guest for you, just like we've had today. But that's all for now, and hope to be back with you soon.
Thanks for listening to Be Customer Led with Marbu Brown. We are grateful to our audience for the gift of their time. Be sure to visit us at becustomerled.com for more episodes. Leave us feedback on how we're doing or tell us what you want to hear more about. Until next time, we're out.